last meeting. Next month will be the final time, and then that one will do the document on relationships between the church and non-Christian religions, and the document on, it's actually on two different things. It's called religious freedom, but it's also called freedom of conscience because it deals with that topic. So it's fairly interesting. Both of them are interesting documents. These two documents are kind of minor documents, and maybe that's why there aren't quite as many people here. All Souls Day, yeah. Good day to rake the leaves. And these documents about mass communication and Christian education they're important, and the bishops knew that they were important, but they didn't have the same kind of vision and foresight to see how the church might move forward into a world of mass communication, or how to continue to explore the methods of Catholic education. So they're more a matter of kind of outlining best practices that they had spotted and warnings, as you can see in the one on mass media. It's important that they dealt with these things, but we have to kind of now take them and go somewhere with them because they couldn't see over the horizon. And of course, in the mass media, they had no idea what was going to be happening in the internet and all that kind of stuff. It is, if you stop to think about it, those of us old enough to remember 50 years ago, mass communication was at a much different stage than it is now. So they can't be blamed for that. So anyway, the one on mass communications was done rather early. It was passed the same day, the last day of the second session, as the liturgy one was. Now the liturgy one really was forward-thinking and was calling for reforms. And so that was really the significant teaching. That constitution on the liturgy was the real work of the first real work of the council. And they passed them both on the last day of that second session. This one was altogether different. It's very brief and pretty much just picks up with the typical things that you would see and think about in those days when everybody would check the Michigan Catholic to see whether a movie was an A, B, or a C, and that kind of thing. That's the mentality they're coming out of here. And the people on this committee, this drafting committee, were not those theologians who were trying to germinate where is the church going. They were more the traditional custodians of good order. One of the key people on this committee was the rector of our seminary, Archbishop O'Connor. O'Connor was the kind of person who presumed that he was giving a good role model to us seminarians, teaching us how to be good clerics, good manners, and that kind of thing, how to figure out the system so that you can climb the ladder properly. We were, after all, in a school that was looked upon as sort of the West Point of the Catholic Church in the Americas, you know. So it turns out that he did give us a good example of how not to be a ladder climber. You can play the game by all the rules and still get shunted off to the sidelines. This is what happened to him. But he was on this committee, and this is the kind, and apparently his colleagues were pretty much the same mentality. Notice that there's two little chapters, and the first chapter is basically there are good things about this new phenomenon of mass media being able to communicate across the world, or at least broadcast in your own city, across your city. But there's also some dangers about it. So they were very cautious and kind of warning about dangers. Incidentally, Pope Pius XII was attuned to the mass media. I think he was the first pope to use the telephone, and he also was the first pope to use the radio. So his radio broadcasts, and there would be certain times. He always had a Christmas broadcast. He always did one around Pentecost. And he had other times, too, that there were kind of systematic times. And then sometimes just when he thought it was important. So he might write an encyclical. He did write several encyclicals, which are fairly thorough, almost like a pamphlet-sized booklet. The radio broadcast would be much briefer because you had to do it in like 30 minutes or something like that. But he would often use it as a way of teaching a specific doctrine. Now, he did not use it the way Pope Francis does, and just kind of off-the-cuff interview, that kind of thing. He was very careful and considered it to be part of the public record. So, in that sense, Pius XII had at least for his era, for the 1940s, he knew that radio was a fairly powerful instrument. And he was aware of Father Coughlin here in Detroit and knew that was becoming a problem. And so he sent Archbishop Mooney here precisely to simmer down Coughlin. So he was aware that Coughlin was getting himself into trouble. He was a real favored social justice and labor unions and that kind of thing. So he was very popular in the Detroit area, and all the working class Catholics really enjoyed listening to him. Coughlin he had figured out a way of networking. He broadcast from the Tower of Little Flower here in Royal Oak, but he had telephone lines hooked in so that he could be heard in Cleveland and Chicago and other places. My grandfather lived in Cleveland, a Catholic, German, anti-Semitic, pretty typical. And he loved listening to Father Coughlin, and he could hear him in Cleveland, even though he was being broadcast here. So Pius XII was aware that the media could be used to teach Catholic teachings, but you have to be careful that you don't get yourself into areas that you should not be in. And so he was conscious of that. And he knew that once you said it, people would remember that you said it, and they would quote you what you said. So he was very careful about making his statement. He thought it through. Here's what the teaching is. He had a couple of theologians that helped him work on things. Father Trump was a Jesuit who worked with Pius XII. And so it might only be a 20-minute speech or 15-minute speech, but it would be a teaching of the church, and you need to listen to it, and that would be his position. So he was using the radio. And it turns out that just a few days ago was the 30th anniversary of Vatican TV. Frankly, I had never seen anything that was advertised as being on Vatican TV, but and I don't know how it's broadcast. Maybe if you watch Mother Angelica's channel, you might be able to see some Vatican TV. In any case, John Paul II set up Vatican TV 30 years ago. They just had a little celebration a couple weeks ago. So the Vatican now has a TV station as well as a radio station. The Vatican radio is online, so that's still it's useful, even though we now don't get the radio broadcast here on shortwave or anything, but you can look at it online, and so that's a way of communicating. So they're conscious here that you can really have an influence broader than just your parish church. So that's basically what they're aware of, and they're addressing that. And notice that, the media are beneficial, but they can be contrary to the plan of the Creator, so you've got to be cautious. Public opinion is really influenced by the media. We should make an effort to shape and spread sound public opinion by the use of the media. But constant vigilance that entertainments, periodicals, and such, which may be a danger to faith and morals, never gain admittance into your homes. Well, that's an issue even today, right? So parents have to try to monitor what their kids are doing, and they're finding that very difficult to do. In this day, it was a little easier. I suppose there have always been young men who hid Playboy magazine under the mattress or something, but parents have to be very cautious about allowing anything on the media that would be harmful to get into their homes. Well, that's a legitimate warning, as we know it today. And that's a constant. There's a little booklet out that has all the shortcuts that you use when you're texting. It's intended for parents to be able to read the text that their kids are writing. Yeah, all these little initials that they use. That's part of parents' responsibilities. Number 11 is an interesting. Journalists, writers, actors, designers, producers, middlemen, distributors, operators, sellers, critics, and all those involved in the media are responsible to lead people on the right path, especially the young. So that first chapter basically is the principle. It's a good thing. It's a new thing. It does have it has power. It has influence, but you've got to be careful because it's dangerous. So that's kind of the first chapter. The second chapter deals with how it can be used in the apostolate, how we can actually communicate the good news. So they talk about a Catholic press and Catholic radio, Catholic television. They make it number 17. It would be a disgrace if apathy on the part of the church allowed the work of salvation to be fettered or impeded by technical difficulties which mass media present, or their admittedly enormous costs. So that's an interesting statement. And so they were aware that this is producing a movie or a TV show is going to take a lot of effort. They're encouraging the church to get involved, and so 30 years ago, the Vatican set up a TV station, and many dioceses did, in fact, set up some kind of a broadcasting system. Detroit had one for a little while. We don't use it anymore. It didn't last very long because it's very expensive, and the technical difficulties are really huge. We still occasionally make little programs. Father Zen is good at making little teaching, a series of talks on a given topic and put it on TV, and so you could actually get those tapes or CDs. So we still can do something like that, but we don't produce any TV stations. Basically, the bishops, 15 or more years ago, when a few bishops were actually going bankrupt over this, the Diocese of Tucson almost went bankrupt. They had to pretty much almost shut down most of their offices in the chancery to do what we just did a few years ago to get back onto a stable financial footing. And it was basically their TV station that was draining the diocese. They got themselves really into it too deeply, and then they had these huge debts. So several years ago, the American bishops decided not to be sponsoring a diocesan or a Catholic bishop's TV station, but rather let those who are successful at it do it. And so Mother Angelica became the successful Catholic broadcast, and the bishops decided to let that be what there would be. Now the problem with that, of course, is that you're entrusting the media to a certain mentality or a certain interpretation. And so she was obviously very safe and very spiritual, but her own brand of Catholicism, which very little about the Second Vatican Council in her approach. So that's what happened there, and that's pretty much the only kind of Catholic broadcasting there really is at this point. So it's interesting that they are conscious of technical difficulties and enormous costs in the mass media. They didn't think to say that in the next one we're going to talk about education. That turns out to be an issue with education as well, as many of us are finding out. It's both technical difficulties and enormous costs. But the very final statement in paragraph 24, this decree is to ensure that the faithful will not suffer harm in their use of media, but rather be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. So there is this instinctive hope and desire that the broader media would be used as an evangelizing tool. And whether that has happened, doesn't, that's... my feeling is that the fairly conservative, kind of doctrinaire people, they are able to get websites and stuff that go, and they're often the first ones that pop up on a Google search for different topics. So some people are able to do it, but it depends on the energy and the mentality of the individual person who's actually sponsoring it. We nowadays, the social media are a big deal, blogs and that kind of thing. Most of us old fogies don't just take the time to learn how to do it. I guess we should just get some kids to help us to do that. Oh, we have do we have a microphone here? There it is. Yep. Thanks.
Pope has his blogs and his Twitter and all of that, and I know a number of people that correspond with him every day.
Yeah.
And he does respond to them. It's just amazing.
Yeah. So I guess things like Twitter are a way that you can do that and get on the wavelengths, and people do kind of contribute, get into the conversation.
And also NCR has, and you can get that on online too. And they have often his homilies, I think it's fantastic.
Well, and I enjoy logging into Vatican Radio now. Every day they give you a summary of the homily that he gave that morning. Now, I've noticed in the last couple of weeks, it's yesterday's Mass. Now, all through the summer, it was that day, and Italy is 6 hours ahead of us, so I was able to log on in the morning before I said Mass, and I could see what the Pope had said at Mass that day. And there were a couple of times when I liked what he said. I brought it into the homily during my own Mass then. But in the last couple of weeks, I don't know whether this is just a fluke right now or whether they just changed their policy, but it's yesterday's Mass that I see. And because at first I noticed, those weren't today's readings. And then I realized after a couple of times, it's always yesterday. So whether, I don't know, that's too bad if they changed that, because I've enjoyed doing that. And that, there's all kinds of things on there. So that's available on the internet. So, and you can listen to it if you want to. There's always, if you have media player or whatever it is, you can actually listen to the live account too, as well as read it, the text.
There's also like now 4 or 5 apps that you can get if you have a smartphone. They're specifically about what Pope Francis is saying, doing.
Ah.
So it's a little different than Vatican Radio because it adds more things and from other people, but it's mostly based on what he's doing. And so, cool.
So that's beginning to happen that way. You have to be cautious with the social media, and that's something that we do need to be aware of, because people are saying personal things, and then we interact with those people personally, and sometimes you can get in trouble in different ways. Sometimes things can be ambiguous, and people can accuse you of grooming somebody, that kind of thing about the sex abuse scandal. That often the social media gets involved in that. Often it's a matter of revealing personal information that really should be part of confidential stuff, confidential conversations, end up becoming part of a blog or a text, tweeting and that kind of thing. And then there's really some serious repercussions to that. I mean, if you go into a hospital, you know that you can't talk about a patient's condition in the elevator or anything. They have signs there warning you about that. Well, if you're a church minister, you can't be talking about people's individual lives and the context you have with people in a revealing personal information. Obviously, that's so there have already been some cases of that kind of indiscretion that has come up. Just the other day, well, a couple weeks ago now, we were at a deacon formation meeting, and that came up because one of the new candidates, the aspirant, is aspiring to be into the candidates for being a deacon, has a blog, and so he's talking about how happy he is to be accepted in this program and the things that are going on. But immediately we're going to think, yeah, but what's going to happen if he runs into trouble, or if we have to discipline him or something like that? Then he's going to use this media to blambaste the church. So that's the kind of thing that sponsors have to be cautious about. It is possible to be personal and in a way that people enjoy reading it and get some insights about it without revealing confidence. You have to be cautious, but it can be done. In our own parish, there's a young man who just entered the church a year ago, and he's been writing a blog pretty much since he, just before he got baptized, or he was already baptized, in the church at Easter time. And then he took a sabbatical, and is just kind of continuing to pray over this mystery of becoming a Catholic after being an evangelical for 30 years. And he writes this blog, and it comes out every couple of weeks. And he even talks about personal difficulties and issues and whatnot, but he does it in a pretty sensitive way. I kind of admire the way he's able to walk that tightrope of being engaging and personal without airing the dirty laundry and that kind of thing. So it can be done, but you have to be skillful, you have to be cautious. Professional people, social workers, psychologists, they all do learn how to maintain confidentiality and still be able to communicate effectively. So I think it's up to the church to do the same thing and learn how to talk about personally engaging questions and both the struggles and the triumphs that people have without revealing personal confidences. So it can be done, but you just have to be cautious about that. Years ago, there was when they talked about the seal of confession, there was a classic joke about young priest who tells about the very first confession he heard. And then a little bit later at the reception, somebody says, I was Father's first confessee. So, anyway, in the Catholic Church with the Sacrament of Reconciliation, we have had that very strict, and still have a very strict notion of not revealing anything under the seal of confession. Now, that only applies to the sacrament of confession, but there is a pretty strong ministerial confidence that is honored even in the courts. And sometimes when it's broken, people get disciplined for it. There was a case in Washington or Oregon where a Catholic chaplain was talking to a prisoner through the typical telephone with glass between you. And what neither one of them knew was that the sheriffs were recording all these conversations. And so this guy was kind of doing a confession to this clergyman, this priest who was there, and then they used that material, or were going to use it in a court, as part of his court case. And it went to a higher court, and they said, no, you can't do that. That was confidential and privileged information, the same as lawyer privilege, and we're not going to let that be accepted in the court. So in that case, they were pretty strict. Michigan has a fairly strong, not just Catholic, any pastor or religious minister has a pretty strong confidential privilege, which is important to know about and be aware of. But clearly then, that kind of conversation can't become part of your blog or your tweeting. Any comments? Any other? Many people are learning how to use things like PowerPoint and that kind of thing to create a sort of what they call multimedia kind of imagery, where there's visuals and music and stuff like that. That's becoming fairly common in youth ministry to do that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yesterday I was reading about the Pope asking the bishops in the world to do a survey.
Oh, yes.
Okay, with some certain things. And I guess the United States bishops, I wasn't sure where they were with this, but it seemed like they weren't going to do it, like they were being asked to do. Where in England, they even put it online, put the survey online, and with the survey monkey,
Yeah.
monkey survey or however you say it.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is very interesting because it looks like the way it's, and there are issues. There are things like gay marriage and a variety of issues. There's a whole list of things, divorce and remarriage and that kind of thing. So, and they want the bishops to be able to say what the people are thinking about these things. And so the implication is you let the people say what they think about it. And at least the spokesperson for the American Catholic bishops, well, we'll use the standard procedure. Well, there's no way it's going to get through that way, the way they've been doing it anyway. So, yeah, well, I certainly hope that if the Vatican really does intend to hear the people's voice, then the people will have to figure out a way to get their voice heard. That's what they call survey monkey. If you ever use that, that's you get a survey, you type in, they record your
But if it's online through England, that means any of us can take that survey.
I would think so.
Like, aha!
Yeah, there must be a way of logging on somehow. Yeah, it won't be very long before it'll be available, one way or the other. They have got till the end of January, so that's done pretty soon. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll keep our ears to the ground, figure out a way to log into it somehow. I would think that the American bishops will simply not be able to avoid opening it up. Now, interestingly, our own diocese is doing a survey right this week, and you'll see it in church tomorrow. And it's asking a variety of questions. It's a more standard, it's on a two sides of a sheet of paper, but it's also online. Starting today, you can't log in. I tried getting into it a couple days ago and it wouldn't be open yet, but as of today it's in. And that's about local stuff, basically about issues about parish, from the parish life office. So it would be important to speak your mind in that little survey. It's not, I think it does ask a few questions about, do you agree with church teaching on, and there's a couple of issues that they specify, or maybe it's kind of generic, but nevertheless, there's at least a couple places where they at least offer some kind of voice your opinion kind of thing. But I am interested to pursue this one that the Vatican's going. We'll be able to figure out a way to log on to it. So this is certainly in many ways uncharted waters, and yet it's clearly necessary to be able to communicate. And if we're going to be talking about the new evangelization, which we are talking about a lot these days, that will have to include various kinds of media communication. The number of younger people who are no longer going to church and don't even associate with any religion is growing astronomically just in the last 5 years. So it's much more important than even these bishops realize to be engaging especially the younger generation. And that means they have to be involved in the actual production of it too, so that because they're the ones who are expert at it, and just have to kind of pass that torch on to the new generation. Well, any other comments or any other experiences? Most parishes have websites, but they're often fairly just kind of stated. I notice the St. Fabians, though, especially when I say Mass with the kids, they'll make a couple of announcements and they'll just refer you to the website and log on there. And if you're going to be in the children's choir, be sure to let us know. Get on the parish website, so that and children are used to doing that. So that we could do it that more effectively. Yes, your kind of hand was sort of up there.
Just a comment on the 5 and 8 in the first chapter. You know, we have the right of information and the common good.
Mm-hmm.
And 8 is sound public opinion is so important. And I think of John Adams' quote, a nation that is ignorant and free as the nation will never be, and so it's just important that we, and I don't know how to do it, but it's just so important that we are in a reformed democracy, so it's so relevant.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I have to say.
Yeah. That's, and they had their finger on something there. They knew that, and they knew that other people were using the media to communicate their particular agenda. We should be doing it as well, and influence the broader public opinion, without pretending from the old days that there's only one version of truth, and that the Catholic Church has the complete corner on that. So it's a two-way thing.
These children, these very, when he was telling me, I remember the second grader got to wear this one day.
Not long ago. And she said, no, you wear this today. No, I wear this today. And what is it? The weather's going to be cold.
well, let me see in the phone what the weather is going to say. She was not accepting her mother, whatever it was. She said, I have to see for myself.
Yeah. That's right, second graders, yeah. Yep, yep. So it's a brave new world, and we do need to be brave and get into it, not try to fight against it, and not to ignore it, because that is the new way. All right, well, let's go to the other one on Christian education. Now, notice that this is a declaration, and there aren't many, there's only 3 declarations. Declarations basically are stating a fact, more than giving a teaching about what to do. So the Constitution is a theological teaching. There's 4 constitutions. Decree is a specific application of some of the teachings in the Constitution. So as we've noticed that some of the decrees that we've been talking about in the last few months, they kind of bring in stuff that's in 3 or 4 of the constitutions, and they're applied to a given area of church life. And a declaration, there's 3 of them, are simply statements about this is the way things are. And so it just kind of is putting us all on notice, this is a fact of life. And so the declaration is that everyone, children and adults, have a right to some kind of educational process. That education is a part of being human. That's a declaration, they're declaring that. And they're building it on the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Children, and John the 23rd, Pacem in Terris, also specifies the rights of children, especially, to have an educational process that helps them become whole persons. That would mean conscious, participating members of the church, as well as conscious, participating members of society. So that's the kind of the fine point distinction between a decree and a declaration. So they're declaring the importance of education in everyone's life. And they talk about, so 1.1, all people of whatever race, condition, and age have an inalienable right to an education. Why? In 1.2 and 3, because they need to have a more perfect sense of responsibility in improving their own lives by aiming at true freedom, as they grow older, receiving sex education, training to share in a social life, equipped with the necessary skills, take an active part in the various groupings of society, ready to converse with others, be willing to promote the common good. So this is a pretty clear thing here that people need to be informed and they need to be taught how to think and that kind of thing. So. And they don't really speak too much here about critical reasoning, but this paragraph here is getting at that, isn't it? It's not just being taught sort of parrot style what the basic truths are or the basic facts are, but also how to think, how to use these facts to participate in social life and promoting a common good. So the whole notion of critical thinking is a big deal here. They're not using that term, I don't think, anywhere in this document, but that's what we call it now. And that's pretty common now in any kind of teaching, that you have to help people learn how to think about this topic. And so in teaching at the college level, grade school and high school too, you're already teaching kids how to think about things. There are even rubrics that you use when you're creating an an assignment or an exam, that the students have to perform certain exercises to prove that they thought about it, that they have actually figured out that there are different opinions, and that they have figured out a way to settle on what is the more important way, and why I would live this way, and that kind of thing. Years ago, when I was a sophomore in high school, at Sacred Heart Seminary, Father O'Leary taught us religion, and he would hammer this into us, that we had to learn how to think. And I can remember sitting there one day saying, what's he talking about? How do you learn how to think? You know, that was, when we were 14 years old, and he's telling us, you got to learn how to think. And so he had us reading Thomas Aquinas, right? There's a good example of learning how to think. Why? Because in the Summa, you have all these questions. Thomas poses a question. Some people say this, some people say this, I say this, and then he gives the reasons why. And so that's learning how to think, right? You take a question and you try to examine different people's opinions, and now, of course, Thomas would, and here's my opinion, of course, nowadays, 700 years later, we're considering that's the right answer, but actually Thomas was engaging in a conversation. He was thinking about these questions. And other people were thinking about them, and he was taking this conversation and putting it into writing, organizing it around certain topics. So that's an important part of this. Now, it occurs to me that that's what Pope Francis is doing. He's thinking about these things, and he's encouraging us to think about them. And he's not afraid to be interviewed by a communist, classic, old-time Italian communist, and not afraid to be interviewed by him, and then he can write a letter after he's thought about it for a couple of weeks. Then he writes another letter and say, okay, now in response to our conversation, here's what I was thinking about since then. Well, that's learning how to think, and that's what education really is supposed to be doing. Now, they don't go into it in much detail here. They're basically focused on the traditional methods of education, and you wouldn't really get that, except this paragraph 1.2 and 3 is kind of leading us in that direction. Number 3.1, parents are the primary and principal educators of their children. The family is the first school of values. That's an important statement, easier said than done. So parents are the primary principal educators, but in a world as sophisticated as ours, they need to solicit help. So there is, in the next point, 3.2, civil society, following the principle of subsidiarity, assists parents with their resources when their resources are insufficient. The principle of subsidiarity was first stated, I think, by Pope Pius XI, and that says this, that the local group, whether it's the family or a township or whatever it is, a smaller local group, it should be entrusted with taking care of their own business to the extent that they can. To the extent that it's beyond their capacity, a higher group should help out. That's what the subsidize is about. So subsidiarity means that sometimes a higher organization has to subsidize what the local group's responsibility is. So the parents are still the primary educators of their children, even though in this day and age they would have to depend on some other sources to actually subsidize what they're doing. So even families who do homeschooling, for example, they don't spend all their time in that one family. At least they shouldn't be. Some families, but they shouldn't be. They often have other families that they meet with. They often solicit the help of an expert in science or in history, who will then be the master teacher who helps the parents to do the assignments, but they have like once a week they meet together and they have lectures or experiences in science or whatever it might be. So there always has to be some openness to having whatever subsidy you need to help you to do your responsibility. So that's an interesting, it's a good principle, and it comes up occasionally, and here it is, the principle of subsidiarity. The parents are the primary educators, but the civil society and the church, as they're going to say later on, is responsible to help out and to assist the parents in that work. 3.3, the church assists parents in announcing the way of salvation, communicating the life of Christ. The church provides service to all people in order to promote the full development of a human person. Notice that it's not just about religious teaching, but promote the full development of the human person for the good of earthly society and for the building of a world which is fashioned in a more human way. Now, I would think that maybe we should say humane way, although this translation says human way. I guess it's kind of basically the same thing. So there's an interesting statement, and this matches what the whole document on the Church in the Modern World is saying. Incidentally, both of these documents are approved near the end of the council. This one is approved like about a month before the council ended. The Church in the Modern World was approved the very day before the council ended. But they're both saying the same thing, that the church assists parents so that the focus of education is communicating the life of Christ, but it also then naturally helps develop the whole human person and helps develop the whole human community. So that by being better Christians, we become better people and our community becomes better because our knowledge of Christ helps us see life in a more profound way. So catechetical instruction, participate in the liturgy, apostolic action. Notice that they're also saying that everybody is responsible for the mission of the church, right? Not just the priests and nuns, but everybody who's baptized is responsible for the apostolate, responsible for the mission of the church. So they're saying that in other documents, and so here they're kind of confirming that. Number 5, teachers have a highly important vocation. 8.3, teachers have a critical role in the mission of the church. The Synod declares the ministry of these teachers truly called an apostolate, a true service to society. Now notice they use the word ministry here. That was one of those debated words that they never settled completely. Some bishops felt that ministry is a formal word, and it's only the ordained ministers who do ministry. Everybody else does other service, but only priests, deacons, and bishops do ministry. But occasionally it sneaks in here, and so in this case, teachers are also doing a ministry, and that word is used in Latin. So that it really is an apostle, a missionary apostolate. It's a true ministry. So we try to encourage our teachers to realize that. So notice in point 9, the church has great affection for you, even those who are non-Catholic. So the church's schools are open to non-Catholic pupils. Now this is 1964 or 65. Probably the majority of Catholic schools had mostly Catholic students at this time, but they were beginning to entertain the possibility. And now, in places where there is a missionary work, often parents were asked to join the parish, but they didn't have to be Catholic. When Theo and I were at St. Benedict de Moor Parish back in the late 70s, and I was going through the baptism records, and Benedict de Moor was a little black parish on the west side. It was the west side black parish. There was an east side black parish, which was St. not St. Peter, nope, even,
Peter Claver.
no, it wasn't Peter Claver, was it? We got a Peter Claver now, but
St. Mary's had
St. Mary's also did, and so did Sacred Heart. They all had African Americans, but there was one church there that was founded for black. Not there anymore. The Expressway took it out. St. George was that was the East Side Black Catholic Church. Benedict Moore was the West Side Black Catholic Church. And then Holy Ghost and also Lady of Victory. So there were several of these churches that were founded pretty much just for black Catholics. So at Benedict Moore, they had a school too. So a small parish, they had a school in the late 30s and 40s. And you go through the baptism records, and there were all kind of people joining the church. Their kids were in the school. And so they were just kind of assuming that to go to a Catholic school, I really should consider joining this church. They weren't obliged to, but they felt it was a thing to do, and a lot of them did. Sure, Don Clark was one of those, yeah. So that was kind of the thing. The little neighborhood parish school would serve the neighborhood, and people felt, well, even though they weren't Catholic by birth, they would become Catholic. Nevertheless, allowing the community part of your school is an important thing. And I look on that as here in our school, I see that as an important thing, that it serves the community. And granted, we are a Catholic school, and they know that they're in a Catholic school, but we don't make them become Catholics. But we invite them to, the kids come to Mass. I help give out report cards and all this kind of stuff, so that it's a parish school, and the people know that, and we carry on. So a fair number of our kids are still Catholic. I was worried. We had an 8th grade class, which is almost all, it seems to be practically everybody's Catholic in the 8th grade class. The 7th grade class, there's only one Catholic in it. So these two classes had Mass one after the other, 2 weeks in a row. And I think, oh man, are there any Catholics left in the school? But then just yesterday we had All Saints Mass, and a lot of kids are Catholic. I don't know the percentage, but there's still quite a few.
The thing, I really feel that this was a really wonderful declaration, and it was maybe not too difficult to encourage this declaration when there were lots of Catholic schools and lots of Catholic churches. And so I just feel that they're telling us that the greater good should be there when somebody's struggling. And in Detroit, in our archdiocese, look at all the struggles and how little greater support do we get. And I just thought people should be reading this now.
Yeah.
And really, because, yeah.
Yep. And I think that statement that they said in the one about media, that it would be, what's the word they use? Not just a shame, it would be a scandal or something. What's the word they use? A disgrace if we were to be hobbled because of lack of technicality or lack of funds. And that's what's happened in terms of a lot of our, I really think that, and the data shows that kids who go to Catholic schools, regardless of their religion, do better. They go to college and they do better in life, especially among Hispanic communities. The Hispanic kids that get into a Catholic school often are miles ahead of their partners who did not go to Catholic school. And yet, there's no Catholic school in Pontiac. There's a lot of Hispanic Catholics there. One would think that we would have a Catholic school there. My humble opinion.
This lady that came through the entrance of the kitchen there, she said, "You don't remember me?" I said, "Tell me something, maybe I remember." "You've been in my house." I was like, "Yeah." I still don't remember. "My grandson came to your Bible school." I said, "You mean here at Christ Christine. No, I'm Christ King. He's now 14 and he remembers that.
Ah.
I mean, those simple,
Yeah.
I didn't remember, but
Yeah. So you made a house call, and the kids came to Bible school. Yeah. No, that's right. And of course, it is difficult. You're making a lot of house calls. For all throughout the summer, there you meet 100,000 people. But nevertheless, the impact is there. Yeah, that's right. And many people will say in Detroit, lots of people, many of the city leaders, as chaotic as our city is right now, but James Tate, who's running for district, he's on the council, he's running for the District 1. He went to Christ the King in Scholastica, Benedictine, I think, was his high school. So, that's, many people will say that it was their Catholic education that gave them the principles that they need to get on in life. Not just the educational, but the values, the sense of community, the sense of commitment, these kinds of things. So anyway, the bishops had that sense. They really saw the Catholic schools, and it would be the American bishops who were contributing to this, because the Americans had the huge Catholic school system. In other places like Italy, every school was Catholic because everybody's Catholic, so you just kind of assume it. So I guess nuns would even teach in the public school, right? But in America, we specifically had to establish our own schools because of the separation of church and state, and the public schools were really becoming Protestant schools. In fact, a lot of public schools were, in fact, church schools run by Protestant churches. So we established our own school system, and it was really going strong in the 1960s. So every parish had a grade school practically, and when I was in the second or third grade, our pastor got us to build our school out in Milan, Michigan, right, 4-room grade school. Detroit had the highest number of parish high schools of any city in the country, even more than Philadelphia, who had a lot. That was very common to have all 12 grades in Detroit parishes. And those students, they continued to know each other. Now on Facebook, I'm beginning to occasionally will get messages from some of these people that I knew when I was just a young priest in sales, and they were in high school, and now they're in their 50s and 60s, and they're in their 50s anyway. But they, so they remember each other, and they keep in touch with each other, and that kind of thing. It was fun to go to a reunion this past summer about the 40th anniversary of one of the last classes of DeSales High School, and they invited the current principal of Loyola High School, which is in the building of St. Francis de Sales, what used to be Francis de Sales School. And so they invited him to this reunion, and he came, and he was delightful. They had lots of questions about, they were visualizing exactly what the rooms looked like, and in those days, the grade school took the first 2 stories, and the high school was on the 3rd floor, and they can't imagine that the whole building is dedicated to just one high school. But yeah, that's the way the schools are now. So that was, they were kind of delighted to know that their old school was still being used as a very worthwhile high school, educating neighborhood kids. And I really do credit them. They're doing a great service to the community. And you don't have to be Catholic. You just have to be, their criteria are you have to have some basic intelligence, but you screwed around in grade school, and so you couldn't get into a really good high school, so they help you study. They have long school days and that kind of thing. So they're doing a good job. So that's now run by the Jesuits, and just kind of allowed to be there. The diocese contributes a little bit, but they say Cristo Rey is another school like that. run by religious communities, IHM and Brazilians, dedicated to high school age kids, give them a unique kind of education. In that case, they actually work for their tuition one day a week. Notice that our schools should be open to those who are poor in 9.3, especially caring for the needs of those who are poor in temporal goods. And in 10, schools of higher learning should be open to university, easily open to students of greater promise who are of more slender means. So places like UD High, UD Jesuit, several again, UD Mercy, and Marygrove College, conscious of this, they both have in their mission statement to be open to serving the community and providing some kinds of scholarships and whatnot to make sure that they're able to come. Because obviously tuition in private schools is more expensive. So they, as you were saying, they were saying some good things here. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to figure out how to negotiate the costs. That's basically the issue. Education is much more expensive now than it used to be, and there's the technicalities involved are more sophisticated. We have 4 Catholic grade schools left in Detroit. Christ the King, Jesu, Holy Trinity, and Holy Redeemer. That's all. So there used to be nothing on the east side anymore at all. St. Mark's was the last one. East of Woodward is closed. Holy Trinity, great school. Holy Trinity, Holy Redeemer. That's not the east side. No, that's west of Woodward. Yeah, the east side is devastated. Barks is not anymore.
And inequity just kind of gets hit in your face when Catholic Central has a personal person from people donate the money so they can build this beautiful Catholic Central out in Novi, and then leaves Detroit. But it's not, people still call it Catholic Central Detroit. How is that?
Detroit Public TV.
My son went to Catholic Central when it was on Outer Drive, and then they moved to Redmond. The whole principle, the whole concept changed, and we just lost it the last 2 years.
So it's just all those things out there. You know, there's no easy answer. It's just blah.
Now, you see, to the Jesuits' credit, they have maintained both UD Jesuit High School as well as UD Mercy in the city, conscious of the importance of the mission to the city. And I think, I guess they're the last of the boys' high schools that's still in the city.
Nice to see the from UFD coming in to help at our schools.
Oh, yeah.
And so their presence is there.
Mm-hmm.
And
So,
they're important for example for the kids in our school.
what is it, every Wednesday morning, I think, they
Do robotics.
yeah, so these are high school students from UD Jesuit, and I think Loyola also. Is Loyola still coming?
Loyola, I'm in the school Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and I think the Loyola people are here on Tuesdays.
Yeah, they come also.
Yeah.
So kids from both of those 2 boys' high schools go out and do different apostolic work out in the larger community. And we have a few of them here at Christ the King. And we have kids who go to both of those schools from Christ the King as they graduate from the 8th grade year.
And then you go to
That sentence about teachers have a highly important vocation, and we reflect on that now, and just to see, how low esteem many teachers are held in, and yet what
difference a teacher can make in a child's life or a person's life. And I also think when you talk about it, I also think though, it's not only the church, but it's just our whole society. And when I think about the public schools that were, we lived in the Cody district. And Cody in those days, all of my friends went on to college from Cody. Oh my goodness, and just where, what happened? What happened in American society that all of these changes, because really it is education that's going to make it.
On Facebook, there was one thing going around. People were mentioning their teachers. And so there was one list, Miss Guinan, Francis de Sales. And so I remember Miss Guinan, and she was teaching. She was a laywoman teaching at the parish grade school. And I had met her parents. Mr. and Mrs. Guinan lived out in the Chelsea area. And this guy had been a school teacher in a one-room schoolhouse. This goes back now quite a ways. And he taught school as a young man in a one-room schoolhouse. And his daughter then becomes a teacher in a Catholic school. And then here she is remembered by students 30, 40 years later as being a student teacher that had influence on their lives. So that is really true. And often, of course, in the teaching profession, you don't get it in the present tense. You don't get the exact facts of the realization. Years ago, there was I'm not going to remember any of these names now. There was a great movie about a teacher in a little town in the South, and there was some tension or conflict where she had to leave. And the very last scene showed her in the bus leaving town. But then there was some looks on the kids' faces as she was leaving, and you really knew, well, she had an important mission there when she was there. And I've forgotten the entire names of all of it, but it was a nice insight into the impact that a teacher has, even though they never really will get the satisfaction. You don't know it. It's only because of Facebook you get an occasional glimpse of it. Once in a blue moon, a student will come back here 20, 30 years later. So this afternoon there's going to be a 75th party for our school, and there will be people coming back for that. So, yes.
I understand that the bishop was really committed to education and was able to revive the Catholic schools there within the city.
Yeah.
And I just don't understand.
Yeah.
We can't do that too.
Yeah, they're the exception, unfortunately, rather than the rule. But yeah, he was able to get together the movers and shakers of the whole metropolitan area and everybody realized it's important to maintain these schools, and because they teach values as well as religion, and so he was able to pull that off. Chicago had something like that. I don't know, they've closed some schools, and they got bad publicity about schools they've closed, but they've had, that's a huge city, lots of parishes. But they also did a project where they got the community at large to help subsidize. And Crystal Ray is part of that they operate on that principle. So it can be done. Sadly here, we got sort of an aborted effort, the so-called cornerstone schools. But they're not really Catholic schools, and they're not under any, we don't have any control over them at all. And I guess but they just become one of the many charter schools, from what I can tell. But that was initiated by the Catholic bishop, who I think it was either Shelter or Mida, who initiated it, got the broader community to support them, but we did not maintain them at all as Catholic schools.
this is a parallel. Because every time we talk about Catholic schools, you need to know that I come from a background of the religious educator of the public school students. So we had easily 10 times as many Catholics that are in religious education programs that are in schools. And I think we also have to focus on the education that we give to them.
Yeah.
Because too often, and I'm talking not so much city here, but out in the burbs, when money needs to be cut, it's the director of religious education and sometimes the youth minister who are either let go or cut back, and we take money from them. And I just was talking to a DRE this week who said, oh, but there's enough money to put new ovens and new floors and new this, and yet how do we value education if we're not keeping the professional person there who can direct and manage the program?
Yeah.
And so 20 years from now, we'll be bemoaning the fact that all these grown-ups don't know their faith, and yet here we are undermining it right and left.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll get off my soapbox now.
You said much more articulate than I've been thinking in terms of, the broader society, and that really just says
Yeah.
what we do.
And, and today the bishops are moaning about the fact that they claim that the middle-aged baby boomers did not get a good catechetical instruction, and yet I beg to differ. I mean, we did give them a good Catholic education, but it may be that they're what they're interpreting as the proper catechesis may be the problem. Now, there's a classic case of this. Several years ago, there was a survey going around that the diocese was taking up because there was beginning to get a glimmer that there might be a shortage of priests sometime in the future. And so they're beginning to wonder what are some things that services that you need that a priest doesn't have to do. So that was a legitimate question to ask. So many people said, well, you should let other people anoint the sick, because the people who visit the sick are often not priests, and yet they can't anoint the sick. So what's the response to the bishops? The people aren't catechized properly. Only a priest can anoint. Well, the point was, ask the people what they need, Maybe you should delegate that particular ministry to other people.
And that's why they don't want to survey us.
Yeah, so but there was a case where there certainly is, if we take a long view of things like anointing of the sick, in the early church, it wasn't the priest who anointed, it was monks and nuns, because anointing was a fairly rigorous massage, and it had to be gender specific. So monks and nuns anointed the sick, men and women, and it was a very prayerful experience. Often the person revived, but it wasn't the clergy doing it, it was prayerful people who were anointing the sick. So that can be delegated to prayerful people again, it's just a matter of the church delegating it properly. There's taking communion to the sick. When I was first ordained, only a priest could touch the host. And so on first Friday of every month, the priests were busy virtually all day long taking communion to all the sick people in the parish. And we all had our index card packs with the addresses and driving around the whole parish to give communion to everybody. And now we don't do that anymore. Other people do that now. So that was delegated. You got a question?
Just a quick one, and I might be missing something here. A goodly portion of the people I went to Catholic school with, ended up as very conservative Catholics. And there's got to be another ingredient here to engender this broader thing. I'm asking the question because I'm a little puzzled, even though I agree with all.
Well, yeah, and we're in that culture war that's going on right now in the last 15 or 20 years. We'll see what happens now in the next few years if Pope Francis continues to try to keep us thinking about what is really important. And it's possible there may be a shift in that. We may get a more broad support for what is the real mission of the church.
Could some of the answer be into this ecumenism? I don't know. If we reach out beyond the Christian faith, that's all I'll say.
Well, and as we noted when we talked about ecumenism, that becomes a bit of a problem because each party in an ecumenical encounter needs to be respected for their own beliefs. But it can look like you're watering down your own beliefs by even engaging in the discussion. Now, Pope Francis is not afraid to do that. He's willing to be interviewed by an atheist and carry on a conversation with this atheist. So, trying to find some common ground. So, I think that's a new model that was proposed 50 years ago. I think just now we're beginning to think about ways of doing it. And that would be true of the mass media and education. These very things. Like in our schools, a lot of our families aren't Catholic, yet we are influencing their person, their sense of value. We are contributing to their growth and development as people and as Christians in general. Some of them go to a Christian church that's not Catholic. Well, okay, I think that's enough for this. These are two documents that raise more questions than give answers, but they're important issues. By the way, were you able to log on to this website, the video, to see the Pope? Did you ever get through to that? Did you were able to do that? I didn't. I was in that, but I never knew what it looked like from above. That was that evening. It was out already after dark. It was after supper, and there was this kind of word of mouth passing around that there was going to be a gathering in St. Peter's Square. And so when we got there, some people were given these torches, very large torches. I didn't happen to have one. So and then they had us segregated between barriers, and we couldn't see why there were some people all together with these torches behind the barrier, and we were kind of in the basic part of the square. Then the Pope comes out, and he gives that little talk that you saw on that video. And they talk about La Luna, the moon, because the first thing he says is, even the moon has come to celebrate with us. And it was pretty much a full moon, and it was just kind of not real high in the sky yet. And even the moon has come to celebrate with us. And if you just look at him, and, gesturing as he does and just so excited. Here he had huge. He's 82 years old, and he's very overweight, and he's presided at the opening of this council, and I'm sure he's been really busy all day long. And here he is giving this very energetic little fervorino. All the children of the world are here. When you go home, hug your children for me. That kind of thing. So you can see the parallel between him and Pope Francis. They're very similar in their approach.
They now call the little boy with the yellow shirt. That's Saturday night. Have you seen that? If you haven't seen it, you gotta search it out and see it. I saw it live when it was happening. It is the cutest thing. The little boy was sitting in his chair right in his mouth.
Oh, yeah.
He got his leg.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
They called him the yellow shirt, yellow shirt.
Yeah. So,
Today, just for